Hello, everyone. Welcome to this forum organized by the League of Women Voters of Oxford. I'm Kathleen Knight Abowitz, and I'm on the leadership team of the League of Women Voters, and I'll be moderating the panel today. I'm joined by two co-hosts for this event. Sandy Woy Hazelton is in charge of organizing this program, and Kevin Rooning, who is running the tech on the webinar, is also here and part of our League leadership team. So thanks to everyone who helped organize us today. I'm going to say a little bit about the program's purpose. Then I'm going to introduce our panelists and tell you how the program's going to go. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for coming. Our program today is focused on education policy making trends in the United States, but primarily in Ohio, and what's going on around education policy making in Ohio. Our goal is to educate people about how Ohio lawmakers in particular are making new laws impacting our public schools and our students, teachers, and families. From the state house to the schoolhouse to your house is the theme of the program. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues like public education and influences public policy through education and advocacy. As an organization, the League supports public education and understands its vital importance to democracy. I want to make two important points at the outset about this program. One is that the League never endorses or opposes political parties or candidates, but we are political. We discuss political issues, how laws get made, how laws will impact citizens, and how we can help citizens share their views with elected lawmakers. The second point about this panel is that we are not dealing directly with policymaking or issues in the Talawanda School District itself. We do not have a panelist from the district because we're focusing here primarily on bigger picture lawmaking trends that are powerfully shaping school districts in our state. We will be talking a bit about state funding issues and touch on how this impacts the Talawanda district in a kind of general way. But no one on our panel speaks for or is representing the district. So we will be trying to really focus on the scene in Ohio and how we impact that. Next, I'm going to introduce our panelists, all members of our community and all bringing expertise to us about these issues. We will first hear from our panelists tonight, and then we will take your questions and comments after they're finished. Each panelist will share a few slides and share some information. When you're posting your questions and comments, these will be visible to the moderator and to the hosts and the panelists, and we'll read your questions or your comments to the whole group as you put them in the Q&A. So our three panelists. The first panelist is Joe Moline. He's an associate professor of education policy studies at Miami University. He's a former school administrator and he is a parent of 3 students in the public schools. Joe will give us an overview of federal and state educational policy making trends. We will next hear from Ellen Price, who is our portfolio director for social policy in the League of Women Voters in Oxford. And she will comment on specific legislation in the past 2 or so years in Ohio. She's been actively following the legislation in her role as social policy director, communicating with legislators visiting Columbus. Ellen is retired from Miami University in 2020, where she was a professor in the Department of Art. Our third panelist, Emily Greenberg, co-facilitates the Facebook group Talawanda Community Advocacy for Public Education, a forum for communicating with local citizens around schools and educational policymaking and advocating for public education. Emily is a graduate of the Talawanda district and a parent of 2 children in the district, and she will discuss ways in which citizens and parents in Ohio and in our region are organizing to communicate with legislators around educational policy making. Thanks to all 3 of you for sharing your expertise and time with us today. Joe, if you want to go ahead and get us started.
Sure. Thanks so much, Kathleen, and thanks for this opportunity. I have just a few slides, which I'll try to share with you while I'm speaking. Oops. Escape. See. There we go. All right. Hopefully, you all can see a couple of slides here. Do appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts regarding key state and federal policy trends with you. And I wanted to start at the state level. Might seem natural and certainly a lot easier to put the lion's share of our attention towards what's going on at the federal level. And that's what I think is highlighted by this meme here. But education is one of those areas where the state is arguably supreme. It's a core power responsibility of the state to provide for primary and secondary education. And that's my main focus here in my remarks. But as an aside, just to say, states have also taken substantial roles regarding the provision and governance of funding and governance of public higher education as well. But specifically regarding primary, secondary education, the state of Ohio constitutionally has the responsibility to, quote, provide for a thorough and efficient system of common schools. And of course, it's a big expense to do that. It relies on people's goodwill and on their tax dollars. As a matter of fact, education uh, frequently takes up the largest share of state budgets. So education unavoidably is a really big topic at the state level. And again, that's what this meme is, hopefully helping us to reminding us that focusing on the state level is very important. So as you, I guess, also just wanted to quickly say though that as you also know, that the local level is extremely important in education policy as well, because states have historically delegated a lot of their authority down to the local levels, allowing school boards to, make key policies on their own, levy taxes, and so forth. So important to just recognize that as well, that the local level is very vibrant and important as well. But the state can at any time, reassert itself, take back power, pass new laws, et cetera. And so that's important to acknowledge as well. So with that in mind, I did just want to say a few things about, some facts, some context, some trends regarding state education policy and politics. Focusing especially on Ohio, the first thing to say is that we're in budget season right now, and Ohio is going to be seeking to pass a biennial budget in the months to come. That's a very big deal for the state. Overall, perhaps the most important thing that the legislature and the governor are tasked to do, and certainly is a huge key for education. And I know my fellow panelists will talk more about this in more detail. Secondly, we, just need to recognize and acknowledge that the GOP is in strong control of our government here in Ohio. It's one of 23 states where they call it a trifecta, where the party holds majorities in both chambers of the state legislature and the governor's office as well. So with that, it's probably a good idea to think about what seems to be central to Republican GOP education policy making right now. And so I'll say a few things about trends on that. One of those trends is a real focus on trying to support and pass voucher and voucher-like programs, including expanding those to make them, make more people eligible for larger amounts of money. And again, through these programs to earmark public dollars toward private schooling. So that's one trend. Closely related to that, we're seeing support for and passage of laws that weaken the traditional separation between church and state. One way of doing that is through funding, for example, voucher programs that are ultimately moving money to religious schools. Other ways have included, things like mandating that the Ten Commandments are posted in classrooms, altering curricula to try to highlight Christian, values and views, or mandating student release time for religious instruction. Those are a few examples. Ohio might not be an outlier on these, but definitely seems to be like at or near the leading edge on some of these efforts on both of these fronts. And then the third thing we're seeing that I wanted to say was Again, somewhat connected are policies that relate to what some have described as culture war issues. And I'm not sure I really like that term so much, but these might include, for example, limiting instruction or access to books related to sexuality, certain historical content or perspectives, um, materials regarding race, materials regarding other controversial topics, bathroom bills, laws limiting participation of transgender athletes, et cetera, kind of lumping together
Mhm.
as under this rubric. And again, these are areas where Ohio has been active. Ohio legislators have been active. Lastly, just to say that Ohio officials do seem to be poised and capable of getting a lot done this session. For one thing, given the what I noted about the trifecta and the composition of the chamber, the leaders that are involved. So again, just to underscore that if these are topics that interest you or worry you or concern you or et cetera, it's very important to be engaged and active and will be going forward. So now lastly, thinking about the federal level, what to expect. The federal level is, of course, also very important with education policy, and we're all probably waiting to see the extent to which education will be central to the federal policy agenda or not. We can almost definitely assume, though, that there will be key differences with this new administration regarding, for example, how it handles and enforces Title IX rules, the extent and ways that it provides civil rights protections for students and educators, and at the higher education level, how it handles things like student loans and student debt-related issues. Um, more broadly, we know that the new administration really supports private school choice, so voucher programs, for example, if they can find ways to do so at the federal level. And we know, or I think we probably can safely say there's a good chance they're going to lean into and exacerbate these culture war issues that I alluded to earlier. Um, and then I guess the last thing I wanted to just say is how important to note how education policy can intersect with other policy areas. So just as one example, there's large concerns right now about changes to immigration policy and changes to deportation policy in particular, which on its own could have big ripple effects in schools and already is. For one thing, students bring their fears and their concerns into the classroom. But beyond that, there are concerns about, possible policy changes that would mean schools are no longer off limits to immigration agents. So schools and districts have had to start preparing for these types of changes, really substantial changes. And so just wanted to say that education policy doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's other areas that are affecting education policy very much. Okay, so I know I've just kind of scratched the surface of things here, but I hope that gets us started with some trends and possibilities about education policy.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone can go ahead and put up questions and comments at any time. We're turning over to the next panelist here, Ellen Price.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Kathleen, and I appreciate the chance to be part of this panel with Emily Greenberg and Joe Moline. League of Women Voters focuses primarily on voting and democracy issues, but we consider full funding for public education to be a key part of democracy. State League will lobby based on funding issues, and while they monitor what we could refer to as social or cultural issues in education, much of that advocacy is pursued by our affiliate organization, Honesty for Ohio Education. So let's jump right in looking at some of Ohio's legislation from the past 2 years. In July of 2023, Budget Bill 33 brought us the education choice expansion, which created almost universal voucher system for students attending private and parochial schools by giving them tuition rebates, $8,408 for high school students and $6,166 for K-8. And I have this on a slide so that you won't have to hear me. Share. Can you see? Yes, okay, good. The Ed Choice Scholarship Program was originally created in 2005 and was intended to help students from low-income families and underperforming school districts afford tuitions at private schools. The expansion in 2023 both raised student income eligibility and dropped the requirement that the student's school district be underperforming. Before the changes, the income cutoff was $75,000 for a family of 4, or 250% of federal poverty level. And after the expansion, families who earn up to $135,000 for a family of 4, or 450% of federal poverty level, can receive the full amount of the scholarship. Those families earning over $135,000 can access a reduced amount of the voucher payment on a sliding scale. Don't make me do the math. The amount of Ed Choice expansion payments more than tripled from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2024. Student enrollment numbers indicate that vouchers are chiefly being used by students who have already been enrolled in private and parochial schools. See these numbers from the Ohio Capital Journal, which illustrate that point. I don't want to, but they went from 23,000 something students to 82, almost 83,000 students within a year. But the number of students that actually were enrolled in private and parochial schools only jumped by 3,719. Also, note the vast difference in the number of students in public school compared to private school, with more than 1.75 million students in public schools compared to 173,156 students in non-public schools. I would add that in my opinion, Ed Choice is not really an accurate term, because a private school can choose not to admit a prospective student. Now, while private schools are not permitted to discriminate on the basis of race, they may reject an applicant for any number of reasons. Also, while we have a fairly large choice of private and parochial schools in Butler County, there are many rural counties that just don't have any choice. The main education is public schools. Again, there's almost no accountability or transparency for the state dollars that flow to private schools. Public schools are required to give students multiple statewide tests every year, yet there are no state requirements for testing in non-public schools. Public schools and their students are judged by these tests, often to dire consequences, which brings me to a positive bill from 2023, HB 117, which eliminated the third grade reading guarantee. This was a policy that automatically held back third graders who did not meet the required score on the statewide language arts test. The social stigma was devastating for these third graders who were held back. And I do think that repealing the third grade reading guarantee was an overall positive move. Also, in 2023, the legislature voted to transform the Ohio Department of Education into the Department of Education and Workforce, and transferred most of the power from the Ohio Department of Education to the new department. This meant more members who are appointed by the governor, not elected by citizens. Some of this legislation reflects an underlying concept that parental control or authority is somehow being undermined or pushed aside by the school system. And also that students may be being exposed to undesirable cultural, social issues in school. This narrative of protecting students from perceived danger underlies the passage of HB 68, also in 2023, which banned transgender athletes from competing in sports in K-12 schools, as well as state universities. This was followed by last November's bathroom bill aimed at trans students, which required students to use the school restroom that aligns with their gender at birth. So on to 2024. The narrative that parents' rights are being threatened by school curriculum is the very basis of HB 8, which is also known as the Parents' Bill of Rights, or Don't Say Gay Bill. HB 8 also required that schools create a policy for religious release time during school hours. Also passing in late 2024, during that lame duck period, was HB 206, a bill that allowed students to suspend a student for 180 days for certain acts of threat or violence. Our elected representatives in Columbus are always extremely busy and produce a virtual tsunami of legislation. And although I know I'm here to discuss bills that have passed, just briefly, let me talk about a few bills from last year's General Assembly that did not pass. There was SB 295, which would have allowed the state to permanently close certain public schools based on their test scores. Also, HB 556, which would have created criminal liability for teachers if students obtained obscene material, i.e. books. And I'll end with HB 240, which would have allowed public schools to use chaplains as unlicensed school counselors. So back to HB 8, the Parents' Bill of Rights. This is a wide-ranging bill that allows parents to opt their kids out of sexuality or gender content in school curriculum and to opt out of school-provided health or mental health care. Although we do note the bill does allow schools to include teaching about sexually transmitted infections, sexual violence, or abuse. Supporters of the bill felt that parents should have authority over what students are learning about gender and sexuality. Opponents believe that regulations in HB 8 would have a censoring effect on teachers and put already vulnerable students at further risk, especially because of the provision that requires school staff, teachers, or counselors to inform parents if their child expresses any interest in identifying with a different gender. On the most basic level, in my opinion, HB 8 means that a student who may be trans or gay and afraid to come out to their parents cannot now speak openly to teachers or counselors. Then there is House Bill 206, which allows for 180-day suspensions and lays out guidelines for expelling a student who poses, quote, an imminent and severe endangerment to other students and staff. Before the student can be readmitted, they must receive psychiatric or psychological help. I certainly understand the need to protect students and teachers from potential violence. But will schools and communities really be safer if children with serious emotional problems acting out violence are then isolated during the suspension and cut off from potential intervention they may get in school? We have yet to see the full effects of these and other recently passed bills. Most of them take 90 days to take effect and will take effect in April. Certainly, the word is out that the massive voucher expansion has severely strained the state budget. All of these are evolving issues, and a great deal is happening at our state level. I try to stay up to date through our League of Women Voters, which has an advocacy committee. I also read the Ohio Capitol Journal, which follows education policy and bills that are passed. And also I mentioned sites like Ohio's Honesty for Ohio Education, which is a League of Women Voters affiliate. I'm very appreciative of sites like TCATE and all the work that Emily Greenberg has done to keep our community informed about happenings at the state level. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to Emily's presentation.
Thanks, Ellen. Again, the Q&A is open for your questions or comments. Emily, thanks for being here, and take it away.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're going to attempt to share my screen. It didn't work earlier today, so we're going to cross our fingers. Yeah, I'm on my husband's old computer, and there's a setting that's set up that I haven't figured out yet. Kathleen, do you have the link to mine still? Oh, you're on mute.
Go ahead and get started, and let me try to get it going.
Okay, thank you. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm borrowing my husband's old computer while I get myself one. So anyway, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Whoever had the great idea of knowing it was going to be freezing tonight and having this as a Zoom is a genius, and thank you for doing that as well. It's like we just knew that it was going to be so cold. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emily Greenberg. I'm a resident of the city of Oxford. As Kathleen said, a parent of 2 Talawanda students, an aunt to 2 Talawanda students, and a proud graduate of Talawanda High School. Before moving home to Oxford in 2020, my family and I lived in Fairfax County, Virginia. And as everyone has mentioned, I am one of the moderators for TCATE with my fellow panelist, Joe, who I call my sounding board when it comes to all things policy. And that gets to my next point, to be transparent. And I want to say this because my background is not in education. I have spent the past 18 years working as a public sector consultant, specifically at the federal level with some at state and local agencies to drive large change efforts. And I mention this because that while I don't have a background in education, I do have years of experience working with a diverse group of stakeholders to enact change, to find efficiencies, and to drive compromise. So because I don't have that background, I have spent a lot of time over the past 3 years learning about how Ohio funds public schools. Tonight, what I hope to share with all of you is that while the public education funding issue in Ohio is a very complicated one, it's one that we cannot ignore. As you'll see on this slide, and I tried to make sure to include sources on the following slides for everything as well. And I'm going to post these on TCAPE so that you can read them and go to the sources where I got information. But there are 3 primary methods for funding public schools in Ohio: the federal government, state of Ohio, and local funding. Specifically, the federal government provides funds to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, and the department then distributes that money to public school systems for targeted programming. Special education is an example of that. The state of Ohio funds public schools based on a funding formula developed by our elected officials, as well as input from the Ohio Department of Education, Workforce and Education, or which way it is now. And lastly, local funds are provided to school districts through property taxes and in some cases, local income taxes. Here in Oxford, we pay a local income tax for Talawanda School District. But I want to go back to the funding at the state level. So Kathleen, the next slide, please. And I can't see my screen, so I'll assume it's there. As many of you know, the state funding formula was ruled unconstitutional in 1997 by the Ohio Supreme Court because they determined the formula relied too heavily on property taxes. For reference, I was a junior in high school when this happened. And like all high school students, I was completely oblivious to that going on. For over 3 decades, our elected officials could not agree on how to fairly fund our public schools. Patterson Fair funding plan, school funding plan, was signed on July 1st, 2021 for the FY22 and FY23 budget as the first phase of a 2-year budget cycle. So there was going to be 3 phases of this plan. The final FY22 and 23 state budgets for school funding plan was really a compromise between the House version, which was built around what had become known as the Patterson Fair School Funding Plan that had been around for a couple years, and then a much cheaper version of the Senate's proposal. The rollout was supposed to take 6 years and was meant to change how public dollars are provided to K through 12 schools. It would give additional support to local districts so they can rely less on property taxes. The first 2 years were partially fully funded. The second 2 years were fully funded. And here we go into the last cycle of 2 years. As I'm sure many of you saw, this month, the Ohio House of Representatives elected Matt Huffman Speaker of the House. Mr. Huffman has made it very well known he is not a proponent for voucher spending over public education. In fact, he could be their spokesman, just like I call my 10-year-old a future Target spokesman. He's that passionate about it. Mr. Huffman has stated he does not think that there will be a third phase to the Fair School Funding Plan because, and I have a quoting here, the General Assembly from 4 years ago shouldn't be able to bind what future lawmakers can do. So what does that mean for our public schools? Mr. Huffman is looking to reduce the budget by approximately $650 million, or give or take 7.65%. Things he would cut include math and reading intervention specialists. And because I know all of you are a curious group of people, I have included our recent proficiency scores from the National Assessment of Education Progress on this slide. Please remember that this is just one way of measuring the progress of our students are making. And like many states, Ohio saw a decrease in proficiency due to the impacts of COVID. But I had a feeling someone was going to ask that question, so I did pull this. I could probably spend hours talking about the challenges with public education funding in Ohio. And I'm very far from being an expert on the subject. And I have to give thanks to members of the Talawanda administration for helping me understand even what I do understand, because it's incredibly complicated. There is not a clear picture unless you are willing to dive in and take spend hours on it. I also did not touch on the unique issue Talawanda faces, the school district faces, because I wanted to give kind of the overall picture of what is going on. But to be fair to Talawanda, this is the Fair School Funding Plan, unfortunately, is not something that helps Talawanda due to many reasons, and one of them being because of how much of our school district land is not actually property tax revenue receiving, if you will. I am going to continue talking about the uniqueness of the Talawanda issue on TCAPE over the coming weeks, as I have updated some data, and I will share that on TCAPE. And anything I share on TCAPE, I want to make sure is understood. It's not affiliated with Talawanda. I try most certainly to double check what I'm sharing to make sure it's accurate. And I post it on a Google Drive so that it is open to anyone who wants to take a look and take a look at my numbers. I know I'm not always correct, but if my children ask, I am. And so please, if you see something that I've done incorrectly, just let me know. I'm happy to correct it. Um, so I want to leave time for questions. So I'll end with this, and it's kind of my overall, not just when it comes to education, but just being an active citizen in general, is that we cannot be complacent just because we don't necessarily fully understand everything. Um, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay not to understand. I do a lot of question asking. I spent many coffees with Sarah Carruthers when she was our representative for the 47th district, trying to understand the going ons at the state house when it came to funding. Um, Public schools are the backbone of any community, and without strong public schools, we do not have thriving economies or safe places to learn despite our differences. So I think it's really important that it's okay not to know everything. What's not okay is to not do something. So that being said, what can you do? You can continue to learn about public education in Ohio. You can reach out to our elected officials to urge them to fully fund the Fair School Funding Plan as it was designed. You can also get involved. There's a slide on here that has resources of where you can learn more, how you can reach out, and how you can get involved. I've also included all of our elected officials' contact information of how you can get send an email or make a phone call. And if you have specific questions regarding how the funding is going to impact Talawanda, there are some very helpful people over in the administration building who would be happy to answer your questions. And feel free to reach out to them. So as I said, I will make these slides publicly available on the TCAPE Facebook page. And I want to thank again the League of Women Voters for including me, and Kathleen and Ellen, and my partner in crime for TCAPE, Joe, for their remarks as well.
Thank you so much, all three of you. Thanks, Emily and Ellen and Joe. We have a few questions. Thank you. And I'm going to read them out and welcome any panelist to address them. The first question here is, how does Huffman's proposal to cut intervention specialists fit into the IDEA and state obligation to fund this federal law? Anybody? And our panelists may not know the answer to these questions, so I'm and
Yeah,
some
and I just saw
some
that
of these,
today.
right, and some of these questions
Yeah.
are speculative, right? Because
Yes.
it could be about something that hasn't actually been voted on. So we would be guessing a little bit. So I don't know if Emily or Joe or Ellen have any thoughts to share on this. The question in itself is a comment which says, how do you cut intervention specialists and comply with IDEA is the federal law which it ensures that public schools, that local schools have funding and support and procedures that make sure they include students with disabilities.
Yeah, I would just say, oh, sorry, Ellen, go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I would say it's a very good question and
Mhm.
like an appropriate question to be asking right now, I think. As for like the exact answer, I think maybe, it might depend on are intervention specialists typically funded through IDEA or not? And I think that might depend by district. I understand sometimes people employ intervention specialists who are not working in special education. Maybe they're working at like at a level for people, for struggling readers, for example, to support who are not yet identified as having disabilities. So there might be a little complication there um, as far as intervention specialists and how they relate to IDEA or don't. But I think that's a really good question, and it would be an important question to be asking, when we're talking about cutting important positions like that.
Yeah,
I just want to say that my learning is constantly evolving, and I hadn't gotten that far into his, cutting of those things.
Mm.
So I don't know, but I am going to say that one of the tacts I see in the legislature is to throw something out. For example, SB 83, this higher education bill. Oh, we're gonna cut all diversity no university major is allowed to require diversity education. Oh, but in order to be licensed and accredited, some majors needed diversity education to be, it's like they throw things out without always fully understanding the landscape, kind of. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Mhm.
well, and I think that what Emily quoted us was a comment in a newspaper, but I do think it points to we have a comment addressing that. We have another comment in the chat addressing that. But also sometimes there are tensions that play out between the state policymaking and lawmaking and the federal. That's not unheard of. But another person posted this comment: if a school or district relies heavily on Title I funds, which are federal funds, to pay for reading intervention specialists, wouldn't reducing those positions mean losing those federal dollars? This is because Title I funds are tied to specific purposes, and if those positions are eliminated, it would make sense those funds would also get reallocated. So this move would have a broad impact, yes. Absolutely. And it really points to the ways, I think, in which state and federal funding and laws are sometimes tied up, and localities are tied up with one another. And so I think the comment is correct. But I would just remind us that this is a comment, not, a law yet. But Emily, do you have anything to add here, since it was you threw the quote out and
No, I
it was
just
in the
found it.
context of your discussion about funding in general? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just found it interesting because it was one of those moments I was reading it and I was like, he's not understanding the full impact of his statement. And that, and which happens, but it was one of those moments where listen, this is, I will say it until I'm blue in the face. Education's a nonpartisan issue, but it's becoming more and more a partisan issue, and it's one of those unfortunate situations that we are continuously electing people in this state who do not fully understand the impact that public education and not funding it will have.
Yeah, I had we had a question about that earlier, about when or how do you think education became so partisan? It's used to be a very boring affair. Is there a historical, maybe Joe, this, maybe other folks have a perspective on the ways in which education became so divisive and divided in our country? Or maybe it just feels that way in Ohio, but I don't think so. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I think, I guess it kind of relates back to my comment about how education like doesn't exist in a vacuum either. Like we're part of the broader context. And I think the broader context right now is hyper partisan across a bunch of different policy areas, or maybe all policy areas. Education might be, compared to other areas, though, maybe even more contentious in some cases, perhaps because public schools are a place where nearly everyone has some experience and opinions about. It's their importance is recognized, I guess. So people do have different opinions, different sort of conflicting visions and purposes about education. And that's always been true, but I think maybe some recent changes around shifting media, shifting digital media, sort of increased strategy to lean into and use um, divisive or sort of like culture war issues, as a political strategy, I think has really affected schools a lot. And then there's, we're coming off of a pandemic, which was awful for, nearly everyone, and but also included school closures that some people were, quite upset about. So there's a lot going on there, but there's a broader context of pandemic, media changes, broader culture war issues and topics that I think are affecting schools to a large extent, and probably more that I'm leaving out as well. But those are some immediate thoughts.
Anything to add, Ellen or Emily?
Well, I would say that I do feel like schools and education curriculum has become kind of a proxy war for competing ideas about what our culture and society should be. It's a cliche, but our children are our future. I mean, what you teach them, what you educate them is what they take forward. And I mean, finally, around all, like, for example, HB 8, I feel for parents who know, what things their kids could discover on the internet within 5 minutes. And I feel like trying to control what they experience in school is maybe a way to control what they can control. Our culture is changing and shifting so rapidly. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things playing into what we see as a final product of partisanship in education. So
Anything to add, Emily, or?
I'll just, because Joe brought it up, I'll just say as a parent who obviously had children who were online for part of the pandemic, and part of the reason we picked up and moved our family back to Oxford was to get the kids back in face-to-face school. For those who don't know, Fairfax County public schools have, give or take, 190,000 students, and didn't go back to full face-to-face school until almost a year after Talawanda did. So, but that opened a door for parents to see what was going on in the classroom, and for the most part, it was fine. But the the small minority was the loudest when it came to um, maybe seeing things that they were not okay with, or didn't think that their children were getting the education that they thought they should be getting virtually. Um,
Mm.
I say this as a parent and not a teacher, and I know very well the struggles that teachers had engaging students. I mean, I sat there with my kindergartner. Like, you don't engage a group of 25 kindergartners on a screen. That's just not possible. Um, but because of that, I think there has become this microscope on public education. And it's unfortunate because I come from a family of educators. My parents even taught online, obviously from Miami, but um, you know, aunts, cousins, all were doing the online teaching for K through 12, and I know the challenges that they were facing. And it's really it's been very unfortunate to see the backlash, maybe because there were a small group of parents who were not happy about what their children or how their children were being educated, and this is snowballed because of social media. Had this happened when I was in school and we had a pandemic, it wouldn't have it. I cannot say, I can safely say it would not have escalated to this point, because there wasn't social media to share all of these things, and Facebooks and all that kind of stuff on. So I think there's quite a few reasons why we are in this position and why we are, to quote someone else, why people are trying to undermine public education. Um, it's truly unfortunate because it is such the backbone of our community. And especially, I mean, even Ellen, to your point, like we said, you know, yes, we have more options here in Butler County, but we don't have the options for private schools that they even do in Hamilton County or Fairfax County, Virginia. Um, and if you go to even more rural areas of
Right.
Ohio and other states, I mean, I drove through Southern Illinois twice this weekend. There's not a lot out there, and there's not private schools for kids who don't have access to
Mhm.
good public schools. And we need to be focusing on providing excellent public school education for all children.
So we've got one comment in the Q&A around the controversy and the partisanship. And then we have a final question about advocating and working for equitable school funding. So let me read the comment first. It feels like everyone's arguing about what kids should learn and how they should learn it. This mess started brewing a while back with debates about social issues and teaching styles, but things really blew up with the internet and social media.
Mhm.
Now parents, politicians, and teachers are all over the place arguing about everything from tests to textbooks. Now topics like race and history make it harder to actually help kids succeed in the most rudimentary ways. And so thank you for posting that comment. It's a nice sort of period to that part of our conversation tonight. This last question, I think, is really about how we all might think about taking action. What do the panelists recommend for more equitable school funding? And so if we might think about like how we could best position ourselves as individuals or as members of a community to somehow intervene with lawmakers as they're starting to make these decisions in this legislative session. If we could hear from any of the three of you or all three of you on this, this might be a good way to close out the panel tonight, unless we get a lot more comments here in the posting. But somebody want to start with that, please?
I was just going to quickly give a shout out to a group of parents and students too, I believe, who actually went to Columbus during the last cycle for budgeting and met with our elected officials for an advocacy day. And it was just before they signed the budget. I truly believe that I mean, I have called our state senator, Mr. Lang, countless times. I truly believe them sitting in his office and giving the face-to-face time and impact that it was going to have if they did not approve the extra $750,000 that was needed, what that was going to do to our school district. You cannot there's no replacement for that kind of advocacy. And I was very proud of them for doing that. I was annoyed that I was unable to be there because we had our family vacation already planned. But I want to say, thank you to those parents who did that. And I think that's ultimately how this is working with the other organizations like Honesty for Education and all of those that we've posted links to and shared their sites. Because those are the organizations who are going to organize those efforts. And that's how we make our voices heard.
Yeah, just following up on that, Emily, all forms of advocacy are useful,
Mhm.
whether it's talking to your neighbor, writing a letter to the paper, calling or writing your congressman, but to physically go to Columbus and stand in front of your elected representatives and tell them what you think is very powerful. And I went not as a representative of the league, but urged and encouraged by the league to speak to the Talawanda situation. I spoke to the Senate Finance Committee just about Talawanda. You know, I had a child go through the school. I'm a community member. And it was only I think we were limited to 5 minutes, but it is a very powerful feeling to speak directly to people. Myself and another Talawanda mother also went to George Lang's office in Westchester. I think they were on spring recess. And he was very cordial and listened to both of us very cordially. So I do think getting to know your representatives, being willing to call, visit, or go to Columbus, I do think it has a powerful impact. Again, I realize not everyone can do that, but it's a lot harder to say no to your face, I think. So
Yeah, maybe I'll just add it somewhat more generically, but I think timing's really important, and right now is a time where this is a critically important conversation. So you know, just knowing that this is a time to try to give legislators the strong impression, hopefully all across Ohio, all across all different communities, that public education is critical to the success and health of those communities, and so hopefully that coaxes them to allocate more dollars, you know, towards education, be more generous regarding public education. But then, yeah, the details that Emily went into about, you know, the funding formula and how funding ultimately gets allocated across the state, hopefully in a equitable manner where, you know, school districts that need more funding are getting more funding. Those are hard details, but they're important details. So it's, yeah, number one, trying to get the legislators to be more generous with their funding, and then number two, trying to get those details right so that the funds get to where they're most needed. And we have a situation where you know, the more affluent communities aren't the ones that are able to provide high quality education, and others are not. We don't want that situation, I don't think. So try to get the formula right for that.
I would add, I think parents have a really important voice with legislators. I also think if you're a Republican or you have Republican friends, to get them to advocate, because the GOP is in charge, as Joe mentioned earlier. And I think the folks that are making decisions to cut state funding don't represent all Republicans. They don't represent all of the people who vote red. And so I think getting those folks to speak up at the right times with state legislators could be a really powerful direction to move in terms of advocating for the funding to stay consistent. But so that's just my 2 cents thrown in. I don't see any more questions, and we're right at 8 o'clock. And so any final comments from any of our 3 panelists before we close it down? I welcome you, if you're not already on the TCAPE site. It's a great way, as everyone said, to stay updated and get more information. If you're not already a member, we'd love to have you as a part of the League of Women Voters of Oxford. We are a really active organization and a great way to get plugged into the community. So check out our website and or our Facebook page. And finally, thank you so much to Ellen, Joe, and Emily for the work they do in our community and for being part of this panel tonight. Thank you, Sandy, for setting it all up, and thank you, Kevin, for organizing the tech. We will be posting this recording on our YouTube page. And so we'll post details about how you can find that. But thanks to everyone, and have a great night.